Be neighborly, my father whispered at the annual HOA Cookout. I smiled and raised my phone to take a picture, but I was really checking the angle of the new camera feed. That night, in the privacy of our garage, my stepmother, the woman our city knew as a model CFO, landed the first blow. My revenge wouldn't be bloody, though it would be a single report, delivered to a full board of directors, and it would burn her world to the ground. My name is Ria Calder, and at 33, my life was a carefully curated facade, much like the neighborhood I lived in. Westbury Oaks prided itself on its oppressive perfection. On days like today, during the annual Homeowners Association cookout, that perfection was on full, suffocating display. Rows of identical wooden picnic tables lined the central green, their surfaces groaning under the weight of pasta salads and store-bought pies. Red, white, and blue bunting drooped between manicured oak trees, a patriotic gesture that felt more like a requirement than a celebration. The air, thick with the humid promise of a late summer storm, was layered with the scent of grilling meat and the saccharine twang of a country music playlist piped through discreet speakers. Be neighborly. My father, Howard, murmured into my ear, his breath smelling faintly of the light beer he was nursing. He nudged my arm. Take a few pictures for the HOA newsletter. Ria, show some community spirit. I gave him the smile I reserved for such occasions, a pleasant, non-committal curve of the lips that revealed nothing. Of course, Dad, I raised my phone, panning it across the scene of forced conviviality. I framed a shot of Mrs. Gable from next door laughing too loudly at a joke told by Mr. Henderson from across the street. But I wasn't capturing memories. I was checking the field of view from the new doorbell camera, noting the blind spot behind the large azalea bush. My thumb swiped across the screen, pulling up a different feed, a crisp, high-definition view from a discreet lens tucked under the eaves of our garage, its perspective covering the entire driveway and the side gate. Another swipe, the back patio, the porch steps, the alleyway. The security upgrade the HOA had recently recommended had been the perfect cover. They suggested a single vendor, a single package. I had installed my own system, a comprehensive network of silent, watchful eyes. My father squeezed my shoulder, oblivious. That's my girl. My gaze drifted to the center of the social vortex. There she was, Tessa, my stepmother. To the world, she was Tessa Calder, the formidable and widely admired Chief Financial Officer of Helix River Systems. To the financial press, she was a visionary. To the city's philanthropic circles, a saint. To me, she was a predator who had seamlessly inserted herself into our lives. Today, she was in her element, wearing a white linen dress that looked both effortless and impossibly expensive. She held a glass of sparkling water with a lime wedge, laughing with a grace that made every other woman on the lawn look clumsy. Her diamond tennis bracelet, a recent gift from my father, caught the afternoon sun, sending out blinding little flares of light with every gesture. Helix River Systems was the largest data partner for my own employer. Northwatch Analytics, I was a risk assessment team lead. My entire job revolved around identifying, quantifying, and mitigating threats. I analyzed contracts, stress-tested security protocols, and built predictive models for corporate malfeasance. It was my responsibility to see the cracks in a perfect facade, and for the last 2 years, the biggest risk I'd been analyzing wasn't on a corporate balance sheet, but sleeping in the master bedroom down the hall from me. We're so thrilled to be sponsoring the youth literacy program again this year, Tessa was saying, her voice a warm, melodic hum. It's just so important to give back, isn't it? The neighbors nodded, mesmerized. Howard beamed with pride. He saw a strong, brilliant partner who had brought order and prestige to his life after my mother's long illness. I saw a meticulously constructed algorithm of social conquest. The cookout dragged on. I performed my role, making small talk about property taxes and the new recycling schedule. I complimented a neighbor's potato salad. I kept my phone in my hand, periodically checking the feeds, ensuring the remote server was receiving and archiving everything. The system was flawless. As dusk began to settle, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and orange, the crowd thinned. Families packed up their coolers and folding chairs, calling out goodbyes that echoed across the darkening lawn. We were among the last to leave. Howard helped an elderly neighbor carry a heavy crock-pot to his car, while Tessa and I walked back to our house in silence. The air had cooled, and the forced warmth of the afternoon had evaporated with it. Inside, the house was still and quiet. Howard came in a few minutes later, yawning. "What a day. I'm beat. I'm going to head up and read for a bit." He kissed Tessa on the cheek, then turned to me. "Good night, Rhea." "Good night, Dad." He climbed the stairs, his footsteps receding until they were gone. The moment the sound of his bedroom door clicking shut reached us, the atmosphere in the house shifted. It became thin, cold, charged with a silent, dangerous energy. "I need you to grab the extra storage bins from the top shelf in the garage," Tessa said. Her voice had lost its melodic quality. It was flat, hard, a command, not a request. I didn't argue. I walked to the door that connected the kitchen to the garage and stepped through. The heavy fire door swung shut behind me. A moment later, I heard the deadbolt click into place. The overhead fluorescent light hummed, casting a sterile, buzzing glare over the concrete floor, the neatly organized shelves, and Tessa's pearl-white luxury sedan. She followed me in, her arms crossed. The garage door was down, sealing us in. "You think you're clever, don't you?" she said, her voice low. I turned to face her. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The cameras," she hissed. "Don't play dumb with me. You've been looking at that damned phone all day." The heat of the cookout felt a world away. Here, the air was cool and smelled of gasoline and dry cement. She took a step closer. The diamonds on her wrist seemed to absorb the harsh light rather than reflect it. "Don't tell Dad," she said, and the words were not a plea. They were a threat, sharpened to a razor's edge. Then she struck. It wasn't a slap. It was a hard, closed-fisted blow to the side of my head. Pain exploded behind my eye, a blinding flash of white that sent me stumbling back against a workbench. My ears rang with a high-pitched whine. The metallic taste of blood filled my mouth instantly. I'd bitten the inside of my cheek. I didn't scream. I didn't cry out. My training, my entire professional existence, took over. As I pushed myself upright, my vision swimming, my gaze flickered upward, to the corner where the roof met the wall. Tucked behind a thick conduit pipe was a small, black dome, no bigger than a golf ball. A tiny pinprick of red light glowed steadily. It was recording. It was seeing this. The initial shock, the hot surge of fear and pain, receded. It was replaced by a cold, methodical clarity. My mind, the one that built risk models and traced illicit data flows, began to process the situation. Event initiated. Timestamp: 1947, East End. Aggressor: Tessa Calder. Witness: 1. Digital. Evidence type: high-definition video, audio, chain of custody, secure, encrypted, off-site server. Tessa stood over me, breathing heavily, her mask of civic perfection gone, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. "You will take them down. Do you understand me?" I straightened up slowly, tasting the blood in my mouth. My head throbbed in time with my pulse. I didn't answer her. My focus was on the process, on the next step. She must have taken my silence for submission. A flicker of triumph crossed her face. She smoothed down her white dress, a gesture of composure regained. "We'll talk about this tomorrow." She turned, unlocked the deadbolt, and walked back into the kitchen, the door swinging shut behind her. I was left alone in the humming silence of the garage. The red light my only companion. I stood there for a full minute, letting the analytical part of my brain take complete control. This was no longer just a domestic horror. It was a data point, the first, and most critical, piece of evidence in a case I had been building for months. I walked back into the house. The kitchen was empty. I could hear the faint sound of the television from the upstairs living room. I went to the sink, turned on the tap, and spat a mouthful of blood and water down the drain. Then I walked over to the holder by the stove. It was filled with a set of new, unused kitchen towels my father had bought last week. I pulled one from the stack. It was a cheerful, bright mint green, a color that would provide excellent contrast, a color that blood would show up on, clear as day, for the camera to see. I pressed the soft fabric to my split lip, my eyes cold and focused. The pain was just noise. The fear was a variable I could control. All that mattered was the structure, the timeline, the evidence, and the inevitable conclusion. My revenge wouldn't be a screaming match in a locked garage. It would be quiet, precise, and utterly devastating. It would be a report, presented in a boardroom, under lights just as sterile and unforgiving as these. The upstairs television murmured, a ghost of normalcy in a house that had none. In the stark, white light of the master bathroom, the woman in the mirror looked like a stranger. Her face was pale, her eyes were too wide, and a violent purple was already beginning to bloom along her jawline. My lip was swelling, the cut on the inside a dull, persistent throb. I held the mint green kitchen towel, now stained with a single, dark red spot, under a stream of cold water, watching the color bleed out and swirl down the drain. This was the reality. The data point. The memory of how we got here surfaced, unbidden and sharp. Tessa didn't explode into our lives. She seeped in. A strategic infiltration. She met my father 2 years ago, when his small engineering firm was teetering on the edge of insolvency. He was a brilliant engineer but a catastrophic businessman. Tessa, then a rising star at a consulting firm, was assigned to oversee the restructuring. She moved with a lethal efficiency, trimming fat, renegotiating debt, and securing a new line of credit. She saved his company. Howard, consumed with gratitude and awe, saw her not just as a financial wizard, but as a savior. Within 6 months, she had restructured his company. Within 9, she had restructured his life, moving into the house my mother had so lovingly decorated. Her minimalist, expensive taste slowly erasing every trace of floral chintz and warm oak. She saved his cash flow, and in exchange, she took his home. She integrated herself into the community with the same calculated precision. Westbury Oaks wasn't just a suburb, it was a performance. Every house on our cul-de-sac had an American flag fluttering from the porch. Every brass mailbox was polished to a mirror shine, and every smile exchanged over a meticulously manicured lawn was calibrated for maximum pleasantness. It was a place where image was currency, and Tessa arrived a billionaire. She joined the board of the local scholarship fund, and the photo of her shaking the mayor's hand, both of them beaming, was framed in silver and hung in our dining room. It was a constant, silent testament to her public virtue, positioned directly opposite the closed garage door. This duality was the axis on which my life now turned. At Northwatch Analytics, I was good at my job because I understood that the greatest risks are never listed on a prospectus. They're hidden in the metadata, in the footnotes, in the patterns that emerge from seemingly unrelated events. My desk was a fortress of dual monitors, displaying a constant stream of data feeds, risk matrices, and legal frameworks. And for the past year, the most significant file on my docket had been Helix River Systems. As their CFO, Tessa was the architect of their aggressive data acquisition strategy, a strategy my team was paid to scrutinize. I was the one who had to sign off on the risk assessments for the very contracts she negotiated. The professional and the personal bled into one another in ways that were both grotesque and, for my purposes, grimly convenient. Tessa enjoyed wielding her power, especially over me. I remember a conference call 3 months ago. My direct superior, David, and 2 junior analysts were in my office, huddled around the speakerphone. We were discussing a new data sharing protocol with Helix River. Tessa's voice, crisp and authoritative, came through the line. "Let's just pause for a moment," she said. "Rhea, kiddo, are you following this? I know these derivative clauses can get a bit dense. Don't hesitate to ask if you need me to slow down." The air in the room froze. The condescension was so thick I could taste it. Kiddo. She used it deliberately, A verbal pat on the head to remind everyone in the room of my place. She was the matriarch, and I was the child living under her roof, implicitly fed and clothed by her success. The two junior analysts stared at their notepads, suddenly fascinated by the texture of the paper. David's eyes met mine for a fraction of a second, a flicker of discomfort in them before he too looked away. I kept my own voice perfectly level, my heart beating a cold, hard rhythm against my ribs. The clauses are clear. Tessa, my concern is with the indemnification section, specifically subsection 4.2b regarding third-party data sources. The liability exposure for Northwatch is unacceptable. My father, of course, saw none of this. He was completely under her spell. He revered her. "That woman has a mind like a steel trap," he'd say over dinner, shaking his head in wonder. "Tessa has a fiscal discipline I've never seen before. She's the brains of this whole operation." He meant the house, the family, everything. He saw her control as a virtue, her rigidity as strength. He didn't see the way her eyes would go flat and cold when he left a room, or the sharp, proprietary grip she'd take on my arm if she thought I was speaking out of turn at a social function. He saw the polished mailbox and the photo with the mayor. He didn't see the storm brewing behind the door. I learned early on to hide the evidence. The first time, it had been a shove, sending me stumbling into a bookshelf, leaving a dark, ugly bruise on my shoulder. I wore long sleeves for a week. Tonight's handiwork would be harder to conceal. In the quiet of my own room, long after the house had fallen silent, the bathroom light became my accomplice. At 2 a.m., the only sounds were the hum of the refrigerator downstairs and the frantic clicking of my own keyboard. I didn't document the abuse in a diary. That was emotional, fallible. I documented it like a security breach. My strategy was born from my profession. Going to the police was the obvious, emotionally satisfying choice. It was also the wrong one. I'd seen this scenario play out in case studies, a domestic dispute, a he-said-she-said battle. At best, I would get a temporary restraining order. Tessa, with her army of lawyers and pristine public reputation, would paint me as a hysterical, jealous stepdaughter. She would isolate me from my father, and the abuse would simply become more subtle, more psychological. A restraining order was a bandage, a weak perimeter defense. I wasn't interested in defense. I was building a weapon. I didn't want to stop her. I wanted to dismantle her. The entire network. That night, after washing the blood from my mouth, I opened my encrypted laptop and created a new file. It was a spreadsheet. I titled it, with a sense of bleak irony, Neighborly. The columns were simple. Date, time, location, description of incident, physical evidence log, digital evidence hash, SHA 256. I created the first entry, October 14th, 2025, 1947. Este, garage, closed fist strike to left jaw head, split lip, contusion. Under the evidence columns, I noted the mint green towel and pasted the unique cryptographic hash for the video file that was now safely stored on a server in another country. The file was named neighborly01.move. This spreadsheet was more than a log of violence. It was becoming a map. The pieces had been floating in my periphery for months, disconnected anomalies that my analyst's brain had flagged but not yet connected. Tessa's insistence on using one specific, overpriced security vendor for the entire HOA, the vague language in the HOA's updated data privacy agreement, the sudden appearance of that same vendor, Sentinel Pine Security, as a subcontractor in a Helix River quarterly report, buried 3 layers deep in the supply chain. Sitting there, the cool glow of the screen illuminating my face, the final piece clicked into place. The spreadsheet was a web, and Tessa was the spider at its center. The motive was never just about controlling me. It was bigger. It had to be. I added a new tab to the spreadsheet, titling it Hypothesis. I typed a single, clean line, the words appearing stark and certain against the white background. Motive? Money? Gateway? HOA. Sentinel Pine Security. Helix River. The plan was audacious, and it was classic Tessa. She wasn't just abusing her power inside our home, she was leveraging the entire neighborhood, turning our little enclave of suburban perfection into her own private data farm. The mandatory security cameras weren't for our safety, they were for her profit, and I, the risk analyst who lived under her roof, was the only one in a position to prove it. The bruise on my face would fade. The data in this spreadsheet would not. It would compound, it would grow, and eventually, it would be presented as evidence, and I would be the one presenting it. My phrase, "Cameras up," whispered to Tessa in the moments after she struck me, was not a spur-of-the-moment threat. It was the activation of a strategy months in the making. The genesis of my surveillance network wasn't fear for my physical safety, though that had become a welcome side effect of its existence. It began, as most corporate crimes do, with a seemingly innocuous piece of paper, a glossy newsletter from the Westbury Oaks Homeowners Association. It arrived 3 months ago, tucked into our polished brass mailbox. The lead story, accompanied by a stock photo of a smiling, generic family, announced a new community-wide safety and modernization initiative, citing a minor uptick in package thefts in a neighboring town. The HOA board, of which Tessa was a newly appointed and highly influential member, was strongly recommending a standardized security package for every home. It was presented as a benefit, a way to enhance property values and ensure peace of mind. The vendor, Sentinel Pine Security, was offered as the exclusive, pre-vetted partner with a significant community discount. To my father, and likely to every other resident on our street, it sounded reasonable, proactive even. To me, a risk analyst, it screamed collusion. An exclusive vendor contract for a development of over 200 high-income households is a lucrative prize. There should have been a competitive bidding process, multiple quotes, transparent vetting. Instead, there was just Sentinel Pine, presented as a fait accompli. It was a small detail, a minor deviation from standard procedure, but my job had trained me to see systemic rot in the smallest of cracks. My first move was to pull the public filings for Sentinel Pine Security. They were a small, unremarkable local company with a thin corporate history. Then, I leveraged my access at Northwatch. I ran the vendor's name through our own third-party risk management database, a vast repository of corporate relationships, supply chains, and subsidiary connections. I expected to find nothing. Instead, a hit came back, buried so deep it was almost geological. Sentinel Pine Security was listed as a tertiary subcontractor for a logistics project managed by Helix River Systems. Their designation was vague. Residential IoT coordination, Internet of Things, smart devices, cameras. The connection was tenuous, but it was there. Helix River, Tessa's company, had a financial relationship with the exclusive vendor she had just pushed through our HOA. It was a conflict of interest at best, outright fraud at worst. The next step was to get the full contract. I feigned interest to the HOA president, a retired dentist named Bob, telling him I was impressed with the initiative and wanted to review the technical specifications. He emailed me the PDF. Proud of the board's diligence, I skipped the specs. I went straight to the appendices, the dense blocks of legalese that everyone ignores, and there it was. Appendix C. Section 4. Use of anonymized data for service optimization. The language was boilerplate corporate doublespeak. It spoke of collecting non-personally identifiable metadata to improve service delivery, map network traffic, and enhance user experience. I read it 3 times, to a layman. It sounded like the camera system would track how often it was armed or disarmed to better manage server loads. To me, it read like a license for mass data harvesting. Non-personally identifiable metadata is one of the most dangerously flexible terms in the tech industry. It can mean anything from the make and model of a car that drives past your house to the frequency and duration of visitors, the IP addresses of every device connecting to your home Wi-Fi, the hours you are home, and the hours you are away. When you aggregate that anonymized data from 200 affluent households, you don't have metadata anymore. You have a detailed, terrifyingly intimate portrait of a community's life. a product that a data-hungry corporation like Helix River would pay a fortune to acquire. The cameras weren't the product Sentinel Pine was selling. We were, our lives, packaged and sold. That's when the purpose of my own cameras became clear. They had to serve two functions. The first was to document the violence I knew was escalating. The second, more critical function, was to document the crime I now suspected was in progress. My Cameras Up initiative was not just about catching Tessa in an act of domestic battery. It was about logging the data flow, the human traffic, the real-world movements that would underpin the digital theft I was sure she was orchestrating. Deception was paramount. Tessa is not stupid. She is pathologically cautious. She would expect me to react, perhaps even to install a camera for my own protection, so I gave her one to find. I bought a cheap, outdated Wi-Fi camera from an online marketplace and installed it. Quite obviously, in the corner of the garage, I made sure its connection was spotty, its feed prone to glitching, a flawed, emotional response from a frightened stepdaughter. I knew she'd find it, and when she did, she would feel a sense of smug superiority. She would believe she had detected and neutralized the threat. My real system was invisible. I spent a weekend running shielded Cat6 cables through the attic, drawing on my father's old engineering blueprints to find the best pathways. The cameras were small, powerful, and hardwired to a local server hidden in a crawl space, which then uploaded encrypted files to a cloud host in Switzerland. They were tucked into soffits, disguised as motion sensors, and hidden in the dark corners of ceiling beams. The lens in the garage that captured her assault was nestled behind a thick electrical conduit, its pinprick recording light invisible unless you were standing on a ladder and knew exactly where to look. Every piece of evidence had to be forensically pure. An amateur records a video. A professional establishes an unimpeachable chain of custody. Each video file that was saved was automatically run through an algorithm that generated a unique SHA-256 hash, a complex digital fingerprint. Any alteration to the file, no matter how small, would change the hash, instantly flagging it as tampered with. The timestamps on the files weren't pulled from the camera's internal clock, which could be manipulated. They were applied by a trusted, independent network time protocol (NTP) server, creating a legally sound temporal record. I was building a case that could be presented not just to the police, but to the SEC. With the system active, I began the painstaking work of cross-referencing. I had access to Tessa's public calendar, and through my work at Northwatch, I could see the sanitized corporate reports of Helix River's major contract milestones. I started a new log, correlating the footage from my cameras with her known movements. For weeks, it was a tedious exercise. Her trips to the office matched her calendar. Her late nights at work corresponded with major project deadlines. Then, 2 weeks ago, I found the first significant anomaly. Helix River's records showed Tessa leading a critical all-hands meeting at their downtown headquarters until 10 p.m. on a Tuesday. But my back alley camera showed her pearl-white sedan pulling quietly into our driveway at 9:17 p.m. She didn't get out of the car. She sat in the dark for 40 minutes. At 9:57 p.m., another car, a nondescript dark sedan, pulled up and parked 50 feet down the alley. A man in a dark hoodie got out, his face obscured. He walked to her car. He didn't get in. He simply opened the trunk, which Tessa popped from inside. He lifted out a thick, heavy-looking document bag, the kind used for legal or financial files, closed the trunk, and walked back to his car without a word. 2 minutes later, he was gone. At 10:05 p.m., Tessa finally got out of her car and walked into the house, looking exhausted from her late night at the office. My heart hammered in my chest. This was it. This was the break. I spent the next hour replaying the footage, isolating the frames of the sedan. The resolution was phenomenal. I could zoom in on the license plate, the numbers and letters sharp and clear against the dark background. I ran the plate through a public records search engine I pay a subscription for. The result came back in less than 10 seconds. The vehicle was registered not to an individual, but to a corporation. Sentinel Pine Security. The connection was no longer theoretical. It was a man in a hoodie in my alley, taking a heavy bag from my stepmother's car in the dead of night. This wasn't about data optimization. This was something physical, something clandestine. I felt a cold, clear certainty settle over me, chasing away the last vestiges of fear and doubt. The sting on my jaw was a dull, distant ache, a physical reminder of the stakes. I opened my laptop and navigated to the encrypted spreadsheet file named Neighborly. The log of her abuse. Neighborly01.move was the first entry. The footage of the alleyway meeting became Neighborly02.move. I created its own entry, complete with the hash and the NTP timestamp. Then, I clicked to add a new tab at the bottom of the sheet. My fingers moved swiftly across the keyboard. The title I gave it was simple, direct, and contained the entire future of my investigation. Kickback hypothesis. The man in the hoodie was the linchpin. His brief, silent transaction in the alley transformed my investigation from a theoretical model into a tangible conspiracy. Back in the sterile sanctuary of my room, I opened a secure diagramming application, the digital equivalent of a detective's corkboard. The screen was a blank canvas. I created the first node, a simple blue box. Westbury Oaks, HOA, an arrow, labeled Exclusive Contract, pointed to a second box, Sentinel Pine Security. This was the public-facing relationship, clean and simple. But beneath the surface, the connections festered. I added a third box, much larger and more formidable. At the bottom of the screen, Helix River Systems. From the Sentinel Pine node, I drew a dotted line down to Helix River, labeling it with the information I'd found in our database. Tier 3 subcontractor, residential IoT coordination. The official link was tenuous, almost deniable, but the unofficial link, the man in the hoodie and the document bag, was a thick black line of ink. The money was the key. It always is. If my hypothesis was correct, the flow of cash had to be circular, a closed loop designed to enrich one person. I spent the next 2 nights fueled by coffee and a cold, simmering rage, tracing the digital breadcrumbs. The HOA fees were the entry point. Hundreds of residents paying inflated monthly charges for a service they'd been coerced into accepting. I obtained the master invoice from the HOA's public access portal. The payments from the HOA to Sentinel Pine were substantial, far exceeding what a simple hardware installation and monitoring service should cost. Where did the excess go? Sentinel Pine's own financials were a dead end, a black box of private ownership. But shell companies are predictable. They need to receive money. I started cross-referencing Sentinel Pine's listed corporate expenditures against newly formed limited liability companies in the state registry. It was a painstaking process, like looking for a single grain of sand on a vast beach. I filtered for companies formed in the last 6 months, with vague, generic names and registered agents known for servicing shell corporations. After 72 hours of eye-straining work, I found it. A series of large, recurring payments from Sentinel Pine, labeled Consulting and Integration Services, were being made to a company called Thales and Daughters, LLC. The name was a piece of pure, arrogant poetry. Thales of Miletus, the ancient Greek philosopher who fell into a well while gazing at the stars. A perfect metaphor for a scheme that relied on everyone looking up at the lofty promises of security while the real business was happening in a financial pit. The Daughters was a mocking flourish, a nod to a family that wasn't hers. I created a new node on my map. The money flowed in a perfect, damning circle. Residents, HOA, Sentinel Pine Security, consulting fees, Thales and Daughters, LLC. An LLC needs a mailing address. It's a legal requirement. The address listed on the state registration for Thales and Daughters wasn't an office building or a corporate suite. It was a mailbox number, 24B, at the Westfold Commercial Center, a place that offered private mailboxes for rent, a place I knew well. Tessa had rented a box there a year ago, telling my father it was for her charity correspondence to keep it separate from her business and personal mail. A quick search of my own financial records confirmed it. A recurring annual charge to the Westfold Postal Service. Her box number was 24B. It was the digital equivalent of finding a signed confession. I linked the Thales and Daughters node directly to a new one, a red box labeled Tessa Calder. The map was almost complete. The final pieces of the puzzle came from an unexpected and anonymous source. As part of Northwatch's standard vendor due diligence, my team occasionally runs passive security scans on our partners' external-facing networks. It's routine, but during a scan of a misconfigured, publicly accessible Helix River email server, a server that should have been decommissioned months ago, our system flagged an unencrypted email chain. The thread was between a junior accounts payable clerk at Sentinel Pine and a director at Helix River. The Sentinel Pine clerk was asking for clarification on how to structure an invoice for a data integration fee. The director's reply was terse. Follow the guidance provided by T. The structure she outlined is pre-approved. The email's digital signature was a mess. Someone had tried to scrub the metadata, but their work was clumsy. The original sender information was corrupted, but fragments remained. The initial T was unmistakable. This was the operational link, the proof that Tessa was actively directing the mechanics of the fraud from within Helix River. Armed with this, I re-examined Sentinel Pine's invoice to the HOA. The hardware costs were astronomical. I looked up the manufacturer's suggested retail price, MSRP, for the specific camera models they installed. The markup was a breathtaking 240%. When I pointed this out to Bob, the HOA president, he forwarded me the justification from Sentinel Pine. The excess cost wasn't for the hardware itself, but a mandatory, one-time, proprietary data integration fee. It was the exact phrase from the leaked email. The inflated price paid by the residents was being laundered through Sentinel Pine and kicked back to Tessa's shell company, disguised as a fee for a service that was not only unnecessary, but was the very mechanism of the crime itself. And then, the blood drained from my face. I realized the final, horrifying connection, the last node on the map. Northwatch Analytics. 2 months ago, my own department had approved a new pilot program. The proposal came directly from Helix River, championed by Tessa herself. It was a project to analyze a new, valuable dataset, anonymized residential activity patterns, to develop predictive models for consumer behavior. The data source was listed simply as a consortium of partnered IoT service providers. It was us. We were paying Helix River to analyze the data that Tessa was illegally harvesting from my neighbors, my father, and me. If this scheme unraveled, the fallout wouldn't just hit Tessa, it would hit Northwatch. We were processing stolen data. The legal exposure was catastrophic. The reputational damage would be company-killing. I wasn't just a victim seeking revenge anymore. I was a senior employee who had discovered a ticking time bomb at the heart of my own company. My duty was now twofold. I had to expose Tessa, and I had to protect my employer. I had to drain the swamp without letting the toxins poison my own well. A direct confrontation was impossible. They would circle the wagons, destroy evidence, and paint me as a disgruntled employee. I needed to control the narrative. I needed to force their hand in a setting where I held all the cards. The quarterly risk oversight meeting between Northwatch and Helix River was in 3 weeks. It was the perfect stage. But first, I needed to bait the trap. They were arrogant, but they weren't careless. If they suspected a real audit was coming, they would sanitize their records. So I had to make them believe I was looking in the wrong direction. I drafted a preliminary risk report, a work of pure fiction. It focused on a plausible but entirely fabricated security flaw in Helix River's cloud encryption protocols. I filled it with complex jargon and technical red herrings, making it look like I was diligently pursuing a dead end. My plan was simple. I would accidentally let this fake report leak. I would save it on a shared network drive with lax permissions. A rookie mistake I knew their internal security team would flag. They would see it. Tessa would see it. They would read it and breathe a sigh of relief, thinking the brilliant risk analyst at Northwatch was barking up the wrong tree. Their confidence would make them careless. They would leave the real evidence, the incriminating invoices and money transfers related to Sentinel Pine and Thales and Daughters, exactly where they were, believing them to be safe. I saved the fake report. Then, I went into the corporate scheduling system. I sent a formal request to my counterpart at Helix River, CCing their general counsel and Tessa Calder. The subject line was bland, corporate, and utterly terrifying to those who knew what it really meant. Subject: Request for ad hoc on-site controls. Audit: Project Pilot R734. The trap was set. The bait was in the water. Now, all I had to do was wait for the sharks to bite. An audit request is a declaration of war disguised as a business letter. It signals a fundamental breakdown in trust. In sending it, I had pushed the first domino. Now, I had to construct a fortress around myself before the rest of them came crashing down. My revenge could not be an act of passion. It had to be a legal and technical masterpiece, invulnerable to attack. My first move was to protect my career and my legal standing. Northwatch, like most large corporations, had a formal whistleblower policy. It was a well-intentioned but notoriously treacherous channel, often used by management to identify and neutralize threats rather than solve them. I couldn't trust it, but I had to use it. I spent an evening drafting a formal disclosure. It was a masterpiece of corporate speak, detailing a potential conflict of interest and data integrity issue involving a key strategic partner and a third-party vendor. I named Helix River and Sentinel Pine. I mentioned the inflated invoices and the exclusive contract. I did not mention Tessa by name. I did not mention the shell company, and I absolutely did not mention the violence. This document was my shield, not my sword. It proved I had followed protocol. The next morning, before work, I met with a lawyer I had retained 2 weeks prior. He was a specialist in corporate and whistleblower law, a quiet, methodical man named Arthur Vance. In his sterile, book-lined office, I didn't submit my report to Northwatch's online portal. Instead, I signed a physical copy. Arthur placed it in a thick envelope, sealed it with wax, and signed his name across the seal. He would deliver it by courier to Northwatch's general counsel, with a cover letter stating that a copy was being held in escrow, legally sealed and time-stamped. It was a power move. It prevented them from burying the report or claiming they never received it. I had officially started the clock, but I was controlling the timer. My evidence was my lifeblood. It couldn't exist in one place. That night, I initiated a full backup protocol. The entire contents of my hidden server, every video file, every financial document, every screenshot, were encrypted with a 256-bit AES cipher. The resulting data package was then uploaded to 3 separate, geographically disparate cloud storage services, one in Switzerland, one in Iceland, and one in New Zealand, all countries with robust data privacy laws. It was digital redundancy bordering on paranoia. I then generated a public encryption key, a string of gibberish that was the only way to unlock the files, and emailed it to Arthur with a single instruction: to be used upon my explicit written consent, or in the event of my death or incapacitation. It was my dead man's switch. The final layer of my digital defense was a new burner email account. I created it using a public library computer and a secure VPN. The address was simple: neighborly, bell@protonmail.com. I composed a single, dormant draft in the account. The recipient was a curated list: Arthur, the Northwatch General Counsel, the lead regulator at the SEC, and a handful of trusted financial journalists. The body of the email contained nothing but the secure links to the 3 encrypted data vaults and the public key required to open them. I then used a service to schedule the email to be sent automatically in 30 days, every 24 hours. I had to log in and manually reset the timer. If I failed to do so, if I was arrested, hospitalized, or worse, the email would be sent, and my entire case would become public knowledge. It was a silent, ticking bomb. With my defenses in place, it was time to gather the last, critical pieces of evidence. I started with the HOA. I scheduled a coffee meeting with Bob, the president. We met at a local cafe, and I began the conversation with a tone of earnest concern. "Bob," I said, stirring my latte. I was reviewing the security contract, and as a risk analyst, something in the data use appendix caught my eye. It seems a bit broad. I'm just a little worried about a potential data leak. You know how sensitive people are about their privacy. His face clouded with the exact mild panic I had intended to induce. A leak? Sentinel Pine assured us everything was anonymized. I'm sure it is, I said soothingly. But anonymized can mean a lot of things. I just want to make sure our community is protected, that the board is protected. As I spoke, my phone was sitting on the table between us. Screen down. It was recording our entire conversation. The law in the fictional state of Norvell was a one-party consent statute. As a participant in the conversation, my recording was perfectly legal. I was not gathering evidence of his complicity. I was gathering evidence of his ignorance. I was documenting that the HOA board had been misled. My next target was far more difficult. Helix River's technical infrastructure. A direct request for their internal logs would be met with an army of lawyers. I had to use a side door. I invoked my role as the lead on the Northwatch pilot program. I contacted Helix River's chief technology officer, a harried but brilliant man named Kenji Tanaka. I framed my request as a routine part of our vendor assessment. Kenji, I said over a video call, adopting my most professional and collaborative tone. As we prepare to scale up the R734 pilot, my team needs to conduct a final review of the data ingress points. Can you grant us temporary read-only access to the API logs for the Sentinel Pine data feed? We just need to verify the data enrichment protocols and timestamp accuracy. Standard procedure. He hesitated. It was a significant request, but my fake risk report on their cloud encryption had done its job. They thought I was looking in the wrong place. Denying a standard procedure request related to a pilot program championed by their own CFO would raise more flags than granting it. After a brief consultation with his legal team, he agreed. For 48 hours, I had a fire hose of data pointed directly at my workstation. I worked through the night, filtering terabytes of routine, boring log files. I was looking for a ghost, a single transaction that didn't fit the pattern, and then, at 3:17 a.m. on the second night, I found it. It was a log entry from a week prior. The timestamp was 02:13:44 a.m. The entry described a large data packet transfer from a Sentinel Pine IP address to a secure Helix River server. The transaction was labeled Manual Batch Upload, Residential Enrichment Data. Manual, not automated. A human being had initiated this transfer in the middle of the night. My blood ran cold. I cross-referenced the date and time with my own surveillance logs. At 2:10 a.m. on that exact night, the lights in our garage had turned on. Tessa had been in there. The motion sensor had triggered the camera, and my system had recorded her pacing back and forth. On her phone, she was there. She was awake. She was working. In our garage. At the precise moment her criminal enterprise was transferring its stolen goods. It was the smoking gun. The digital fingerprint that placed her at the scene of the crime. I now had everything I needed to destroy her internally, but that wasn't enough. A corporate firing and a quiet settlement wouldn't suffice. I needed to burn her public image to the ground. I needed a nuke. I found one in the form of a man named Marcus Thorne. He was an independent investigative journalist, a Pulitzer Prize finalist with a reputation for dismantling complex financial crimes. He worked on retainer, for clients who wanted to bring a story to light, but needed a layer of legal and professional separation. I met him in a dive bar on the other side of town. I didn't give him the evidence. I gave him a hypothesis. I signed a contract, paying his substantial fee from my own savings. I was not his source. I was his client. I was hiring him to investigate a potential data fraud scheme involving the Westbury Oaks HOA and Helix River systems. He would be the one to break the story, and the contract stipulated that he would publish his findings at the exact time and date of my choosing. The final piece fell into place a week later. The official email landed in my inbox. Its subject line a bland announcement of a future event. It was the formal invitation to the Northwatch Helix River Quarterly Strategic Partnership Review. The date was set. The attendees were confirmed. Tessa Calder would be there, presenting on the promising future of anonymized residential data. The stage was set. That evening, I began preparing my presentation. I didn't need elaborate charts or graphs. I didn't need pages of text. I opened the presentation software and created a single title slide. The background was stark white. The text was black, centered, in a clean, sans serif font. It contained only 2 words. The 2 words my father had spoken to me on the day this all began. The 2 words that had become the code name for my entire operation. The 2 words that would serve as the title of her execution. Be neighborly. The lobby of the Helix River Systems headquarters was a cathedral of corporate power. A 3-story atrium of glass and steel soared above me. The air was cool and still, and the only sound was the hushed tapping of keyboards from a reception desk carved from a single block of white marble. The woman at the desk didn't smile. She processed me. She scanned my driver's license, her eyes flicking from my face to the screen, and printed a visitor badge. She slid it across the marble countertop. The plastic was still warm. My name was printed in stark black letters below the corporate logo. R. Calder, Risk. It felt less like a job title and more like a declaration of intent. I was not a guest. I was a threat. I was escorted to a conference room on the executive floor. The walls were glass, offering a panoramic view of the city, a landscape of glittering towers that seemed to hold the sky at bay. Tessa was already there, standing beside the floor-to-ceiling window, a silhouette against the bright morning light. She turned as I entered, and the mask of benevolent power was perfectly in place. She wore a charcoal gray suit that was a marvel of tailoring, severe and elegant. With her was a man in his 50s with tired eyes and an expensive watch, whom she introduced as Julian Croft, Helix River's general counsel. "Rhea, kiddo, thanks for coming in," Tessa said, her voice smooth as polished stone. She gestured to the long, gleaming mahogany table. "Julian and I are happy to clear up any confusion your little report might have generated." The word kiddo hung in the air between us, a deliberate and public act of diminishment. It was for Julian's benefit, a subtle reminder of our domestic relationship, designed to undermine my professional authority before I'd even spoken a word. I gave a small, tight smile and ignored it, directing my attention to Julian. "Thank you for your time, Julian," I said, my voice cool and even. "As you know, this is a standard on-site controls audit, a procedural follow-up to our initial risk assessment of the R-734 pilot." I placed my briefcase on the table and opened it, a deliberate and methodical set of movements. I was performing my own kind of power, the power of process, the power of the audit trail. We spent the first hour in a tedious pantomime of corporate cooperation. They walked me through the data security protocols for the pilot program, the same ones I had already reviewed and knew to be largely irrelevant. They were showing me the strength of the castle's front gate, hoping I wouldn't notice the secret tunnel being dug beneath the walls. Finally, I made my move. "This is all very thorough," I said, closing my notebook. "There's just one more area I need to review to complete my assessment. I need to see the master service agreement and all associated subcontracts for the primary data vendor in this pilot, Sentinel Pine Security." A flicker of something, annoyance, caution, passed across Julian's face. Tessa's smile didn't waver. "Of course," she said. "Julian, can you have your assistant bring in the file?" The file arrived a few minutes later. A thin document folder. Julian slid it across the table. I opened it. The master service agreement was there, but every page that detailed financial terms, service-level agreements, and subcontractor relationships was a sea of black redaction boxes. It was a document that said nothing, an insult disguised as compliance. I looked up, my expression neutral. "I'm afraid this won't be sufficient," I said calmly. "This version is incomplete." Julian leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. "That's the version we're authorized to share with external partners. Rhea, I'm sure you understand. Proprietary business information." "I do understand," I said. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a single, folded sheet of paper. I unfolded it and placed it on the table, turning it to face him. It was a copy of a page from the master agreement between Northwatch and Helix River, the overarching contract that governed our entire strategic partnership. I'd had it memorized for weeks. My finger tapped a specific paragraph. I'm sure you're also familiar with Section 8, Subsection 4 of our own partnership agreement, the Right to Inspect Clause. It grants Northwatch, as the primary partner, the right to conduct a full and unrestricted audit of any and all third-party vendor contracts directly related to joint pilot programs. It specifically prohibits the redaction of financial and operational data. I need the unredacted version, Julian, or I will have to note in my official report that Helix River has refused to comply with the terms of our agreement. The silence in the room was absolute. I had called their bluff. Tessa's smile finally tightened at the edges. Julian stared at the paper, then at me. He knew I had him. A refusal would trigger a formal breach of contract investigation, a far bigger headache than letting me see the files. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to Tessa. "Very thorough, Rhea," Tessa said, her voice a little too bright. "We appreciate your diligence." She picked up the intercom. "Sarah, please bring the full Sentinel Pine file, the Level A clearance version." The new file was a thick binder, heavy with paper. They placed it in front of me and then sat back, watching. This was the next stage of the game. Intimidation through observation. They expected me to be nervous, to rush. I did the opposite. I worked slowly, deliberately. I put on a pair of reading glasses I didn't need, a prop to enhance the image of a boring, detail-obsessed analyst. I turned each page with methodical slowness, scanning, reading, my face a mask of detached professionalism. Inside, my heart was a trip hammer. I was looking for the thread, the one piece of paper that didn't belong. And then, halfway through a stack of scanned invoices for hardware purchases, I saw it. It was a single page, clearly scanned from a different machine, the resolution slightly off. The invoice was from Thales and Daughters, LLC. The description of services was laughably vague. Annual family and security consultation fee. The amount was a staggering $50,000, and at the bottom, in the space for client approval, was a signature. It was written in a fluid, confident hand, a bold, decisive script I would recognize anywhere. It was Tessa's. Adrenaline surged through me, hot and sharp. I felt a tremor start in my hands. I clasped them in my lap, beneath the table, and took a slow, deep breath. I could not react. I could not let them see that I had found it. I turned the page as if it were just another boring invoice, my eyes continuing to scan the next document, but my mind had frozen on that signature. She had been arrogant. She had mixed the fraudulent invoice in with the legitimate ones, burying it in a mountain of data, never dreaming anyone would look this closely. I needed a copy, but I couldn't ask for one. I couldn't even let my gaze linger on the page. The mahogany table was polished to a mirror finish. I could see the reflection of the overhead lights, a perfect, distorted grid on its surface. An idea, born of pure desperation, sparked in my mind. I kept turning pages for another 10 minutes, feigning diligence. Then, I reached for my phone, placing it face up on the table beside the binder. "Sorry. Just need to check on a message from my team," I murmured, a throwaway apology. I angled the phone slightly. The reflection of the page I was on was captured on its dark screen. I turned a few more pages, slowly. Then, I turned back, as if double-checking something. I navigated back to the Thales and Daughters invoice. For a split second, its reflection was perfectly framed on my phone's screen. The angle was skewed, the text warped, but the crucial details, the name, the amount, the signature, were all there, captured in the dark mirror of my device. My thumb, appearing to swipe away a notification, pressed the button to capture a screenshot. The action was silent, invisible. It was done. I had it. I closed the binder. "This seems to be everything I need for now," I said, my voice betraying none of the storm raging inside me. I stood up, collecting my things. "Thank you for your cooperation." As I walked toward the door, Tessa moved to walk with me. We were a few feet ahead of Julian, a small, feigned moment of privacy. "You're working so hard on this. Rhea," she said, her voice a low purr. Her hand came up and, in a gesture that looked like a gentle, stepmotherly touch, her fingers closed around my wrist. Her grip was like steel. Her thumb pressed down, directly onto the faint, yellowing bruise from the night in the garage. A bolt of pain shot up my arm. She leaned in close, her breath warm against my ear. "Be careful," she whispered. "You don't want to get in over your head." The threat was naked, the violence just beneath the surface of her skin. For a moment, all I could feel was the pain, the rage, the memory of the garage floor. But then, the cold, analytical part of me took back control. I didn't pull my arm away. I leaned in. My own voice barely a whisper, a single, sharp stiletto of a response. "Cameras up." I felt it. A tremor in her hand. Her grip faltered for a fraction of a second. I looked at her. Her eyes, which had been alight with smug dominance, were suddenly flat. The confident smirk was gone, replaced by a flicker of pure, unadulterated shock. It was the first time I had ever seen a genuine crack in her composure. It was a victory. I gently pulled my arm from her grasp and walked out of the room without looking back. That night, I was watching the feeds again. My victory in the conference room had been exhilarating, but I knew it would have consequences. I had shown my hand. She knew that I knew something. She would be moving to cover her tracks. My theory was confirmed at 11:42 p.m. The camera covering the back alley captured the same dark sedan from before. The same man in the hoodie got out. This time, he didn't go to Tessa's car. He went to the side of the house, to a small, locked utility cabinet built into the wall. Tessa met him there. There was no document bag. Instead, he handed her a small, heavy-looking lockbox. She took it, unlocked the cabinet, and placed it inside. They exchanged no words. He got back in his car and drove away. She was moving the evidence, the physical records, the real invoices, the proof. The audit had spooked her. She was transferring her secret files from a bag in her car to a more secure, hidden location, a location I now had on video. I isolated the clip, ran the hash, and logged it. I saved the file, the name a testament to the final piece of visual evidence I would need. Neighborly 02, final. Move. The Northwatch boardroom was on the top floor, a glass box suspended in the sky. It was a space designed to project power and clarity, all polished chrome, black leather, and a single, immense glass table whose surface was so reflective it looked like a sheet of dark water. The mood was one of restrained anticipation. Our CEO, Robert Avery, a man with a reputation for quiet ruthlessness, sat at the head of the table. To his right was Eleanor Vance, our general counsel, her face an unreadable study in legal impassivity. The rest of the board and senior VPs were arranged down the long sides. The delegation from Helix River, led by Tessa, sat opposite me. She looked radiant, exuding a confidence that bordered on radioactive. She saw this meeting as her victory lap. Her presentation was flawless. Titled, "The Future of Anonymized Residential Data." It was a symphony of corporate buzzwords and futuristic promises. She spoke of predictive analytics, of enhanced community services, of a world made safer and more efficient through the benign observation of data patterns. The board was captivated. They saw dollar signs. They saw innovation. They didn't see the crime scene I was about to reveal. When she finished, a polite ripple of applause went through the room. Robert Avery turned his gaze to me. "Rhea, you've been leading the risk assessment on this pilot. Your thoughts?" This was the moment. The entire room turned to face me. Tessa's expression was one of indulgent curiosity, as if she were about to listen to a favored pupil recite a lesson. I felt the familiar, the cold calm settle over me. My heart rate was steady. My hands were still. I picked up the small, black clicker from the table. "Thank you, Robert," I said, my voice even. "My team has completed its review, and we have identified a series of material risks that require the board's immediate attention. I pressed the button, the massive screen at the end of the room, which had just displayed Tessa's complex data models, flickered. It was replaced by a single, high-resolution photograph, the HOA Cookout. The image was bright, sunny, and painfully all-American. There were balloons, smiling neighbors, and the haze of barbecue smoke in the air. The photo was framed tightly on a picnic table laden with food. In the foreground, a woman's hands rested on the table's edge. One hand wore a distinctive watch with a mother-of-pearl face. The other was adorned with a glittering diamond tennis bracelet. They were Tessa's hands. The image was benign, yet in the sterile context of the boardroom, it was jarring, deeply personal. A low murmur went through the room. Tessa's smile froze on her face. I clicked again. The photograph slid to the left, and a diagram bloomed on the right side of the screen. It was my conspiracy map. Simple boxes connected by stark black arrows, illustrating the flow of money, from the residents of Westbury Oaks to the HOA, then to Sentinel Pine Security. The next arrow was labeled Inflated Consulting and Integration Fees. It pointed to a box the board had never seen before, Thales and Daughters, LLC. From that box, a final, damning arrow pointed to a single name, Tessa Calder. The murmuring in the room grew louder, sharper. I saw Eleanor Vance, the general counsel, lean forward. Her eyes narrowed, her entire body suddenly rigid with focus. She understood immediately. This wasn't a risk assessment. It was an indictment. I clicked again. A new piece of data appeared on the screen. It was a single line of text, pulled from the Helix River API log I had acquired. Timestamp, 02/13:44 a.m. Transaction, manual batch upload. Source, Sentinel Pine IP. Description, residential enrichment data. At 2:13 a.m. 2 weeks ago, I stated, my voice cutting through the rising tension. A manual data transfer was initiated from the vendor to Helix River's servers. This is a significant anomaly. The data feed is supposed to be automated and continuous, not uploaded in manual batches in the middle of the night. I let the implication hang in the air for a moment before clicking again. A video player appeared next to the log entry. I pressed play. The video was silent, the quality stark and clear under the fluorescent hum of a garage light. It didn't show Tessa's face. It didn't need to. It showed a woman, from the chest down, pacing back and forth on a concrete floor. On one wrist was the mother-of-pearl watch, on the other, the diamond tennis bracelet, glittering under the harsh light. The timestamp on the bottom of the video feed was synchronized with the API log on the screen. The woman in the video was in my garage, on her phone, at the exact moment the illegal data transfer was taking place. I paused the video. As you can see, the CFO of Helix River was awake and active at the precise time of this anomalous and unauthorized data transfer. This is not the only instance of clandestine activity. I clicked once more. A second video played. The dark alley, the man in the hoodie, the transfer of the document bag from Tessa's trunk. I didn't editorialize. I just showed the data, the visual proof of a conspiracy in motion. Tessa finally broke her silence. A short, sharp laugh escaped her lips. It was a brittle, ugly sound. "This is absurd," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. A creatively edited montage of unrelated clips and a few out-of-context documents. Anyone can fake a video. It's meaningless. She was trying to regain control, to frame me as a fantasist. It was her last, desperate move. It was the one I had been waiting for. "You're right," I said, turning to face her fully. "Video can be manipulated, so let's look at something that can't be." I clicked the remote one final time. The screen was filled with the image I had captured from the reflection on the mahogany table. The invoice from Thales and Daughters, LLC. The image was skewed, but I had digitally corrected it. The words, "Annual Family and Security Consultation Fee," were perfectly legible. The amount, $50,000, was stark and clear, and at the bottom was her signature. Next to it, I brought up an image from Helix River's most recent public SEC filing, a document she had signed as Chief Financial Officer. I zoomed in on both signatures until they filled the screen. Side by side, they were identical, the same confident loops, the same sharp, decisive cross on the T. It was an irrefutable match, a financial document linking her shell company to her corporate malfeasance, signed in her own hand. The room was utterly silent. The low hum of the building's HVAC system was the only sound. All eyes were on the screen, then on Tessa. The color had drained from her face. The mask was gone. For the first time, she looked trapped. Robert Avery, our CEO, finally spoke. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. He looked not at Tessa, but at me. "What is your recommendation, Ria?" I met his gaze without flinching. The words were ready. They were clean, precise, and final. "My recommendation is threefold," I said, my voice ringing with clarity in the silent room. 1. Immediately terminate the R-734 pilot program and sever the data sharing agreement with Helix River Systems. 2. Engage an independent, external forensic accounting firm to conduct a full investigation into Thales and Daughters LLC and every financial transaction between Helix River and Sentinel Pine Security. 3. I paused, letting the final word land with the force of a physical blow. We notify the appropriate regulatory and law enforcement agencies. Immediately, Robert Avery's voice cut through the stunned silence. This board will take a 15-minute recess. We will reconvene in the adjacent chamber. Miss Calder, you will remain here. The Helix River delegation will also remain here. It wasn't a request. The board members rose as one, their faces a mixture of shock and grim calculation, and filed out of the room, leaving a vacuum of cold, heavy air behind them. The moment the door closed, I slid my hand into my briefcase. My fingers found my burner phone. It was now or never. I unlocked the screen, my movements small and hidden by the bulk of my bag. I navigated to the secure email client, to the single draft sitting in the outbox of Neighborly, Bell. The recipient list was a roll call of Tessa's doom. My thumb hovered over the send icon. I looked up. Tessa was across the table, staring at me, her eyes burning with a hatred so pure it was almost beautiful. I met her gaze, held it, and pressed send. The email, with its payload of encrypted evidence and the key to unlock it, was gone. The bomb was now airborne. Simultaneously, miles away in the quiet suburb of Westbury Oaks, a courier was ringing the doorbell of Bob, the HOA president. He signed for a slim, official-looking document envelope. Inside, he found a flash drive and a single sheet of paper with a note typed in bold letters. Urgent. Evidence of widespread data fraud and financial misconduct pertaining to the Sentinel Pine security contract. Your residents are at risk. Review immediately. The dominoes began to fall, faster than even I had anticipated. My personal phone, sitting on the table, buzzed. A news alert from Marcus Thorne's media outlet. The headline was a digital cannon blast. Exclusive. Helix River CFO Tessa Calder implicated in sophisticated kickback scheme involving suburban HOA and illicit data harvesting. Downstairs, in the marble lobby of the Northwatch Tower, the massive video wall that usually displayed market data and corporate branding suddenly switched to the live feed of a national financial news network. Marcus Thorne's face appeared, speaking with grim authority. The story was leading the midday news cycle. Behind him, graphics appeared on screen, showing the flow of money, a picture of Tessa's private mailbox at the Westfold Commercial Center, and a crystal-clear, zoomed-in shot of the Sentinel Pine sedan's license plate, taken from my alleyway camera. The junior executives from Helix River, who had been waiting in the lobby's leather chairs, looked up at the screen. Their confident chatter died. I could picture the scene perfectly, the slow, dawning horror on their faces. One of them would discreetly pull out their phone, sending a frantic text to a colleague. The internal network at Helix River would be igniting with panic and speculation. The fire was spreading. Back in Westbury Oaks, a terrified Bob, having seen enough on the flash drive to understand the magnitude of his legal exposure, made a panicked decision. He didn't call a lawyer. He opened the private Westbury Oaks community Facebook group, his hands shaking, and hit the Go Live button. A second notification vibrated on my phone. Westbury Oaks HOA is now live. Emergency community briefing. The second front of the war had just opened. In the boardroom, Tessa's phone rang. The sound was shrill, violent. She snatched it up, her eyes still locked on mine. She expected it to be her CEO or her lawyer, but the name on the screen was Howard, my father. This was her last resort, her final, desperate appeal to a loyalty she had manufactured. "I need to take this," she said, her voice strained. "No, why, you don't," I replied. I reached for my own phone, the one my father was actually calling, earlier that morning. I'd told him I was having phone trouble and asked to borrow his for the day, citing an urgent need for a reliable connection for my big meeting. He'd handed it over without a second thought. I answered the call and pressed the speakerphone button. I placed the phone gently on the glass table, directly in front of Eleanor Vance, our general counsel. My father's voice, tinny and laced with confusion, filled the silent room. "Tessa, what the hell is going on? My phone is blowing up. They're saying you... Rhea, are you there?" Tessa's face contorted in a mask of disbelief and rage as she heard his voice coming from my phone. "I'm here, Dad," I said, my voice as calm as a frozen lake. "There's a news story. They're saying things. Rhea, tell me this isn't true." His voice was pleading, the sound of a man watching his world crumble. Tessa lunged for the phone, but Julian Croft, her own lawyer, put a hand on her arm, holding her back. He knew it was over. There was a long, painful silence on the line. I could hear his ragged breathing. Then, his voice came again, smaller, broken. "You have proof, Rhea?" I looked across the table at the woman who had terrorized me, who had built an empire on lies, who had struck me in the dark. "I don't have proof, Dad," I said. "I just have the truth." I disconnected the call. The door to the boardroom opened, and Robert Avery and the rest of the board returned. The atmosphere was no longer one of shock. It was arctic. Eleanor Vance didn't sit down. She stood, her hands resting on the back of her chair, and activated the small microphone in front of her, its signal feeding into the room's official recording system. "Pursuant to the terms of the Northwatch Helix River Strategic Partnership Agreement, Section 8, Subsection 4, she announced, her voice resonating with absolute legal authority. "We are hereby giving notice of a material breach. All joint projects are suspended, effective immediately. We will be preserving all related documents and cooperating fully with the relevant authorities." As if on cue, 2 uniformed Northwatch security guards entered the room. They walked not to me, but to Tessa. One of them spoke, his voice polite but firm. "Ma'am, we've been asked to escort you from the building." Tessa stood up, pulling her suit jacket straight, a final, futile gesture of defiance. She looked at the guards, then at Robert Avery, her expression one of utter contempt. "I am an honored guest of this company," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "Not anymore," Avery replied, his tone flat, devoid of any emotion. They led her out. As she passed me, her shoulder brushed mine. For a moment, our eyes met. Then she was gone. The heavy door clicked shut behind her. A moment later, from the hallway, came a single, sharp sound, echoing through the silent floor, the chime of the arriving elevator, signaling its descent. It sounded like the blow of a judge's gavel. My eyes fell to the table, to the spot where her hands had rested just an hour before. I pictured her diamond tennis bracelet, and in my mind's eye, I saw it not in the soft light of the boardroom, but under the harsh, buzzing fluorescent glare of my garage camera, the facets of the diamonds catching the light in a pattern as unique and as damning as a fingerprint, perfectly preserved in a video file time-stamped at 2:13 a.m. The aftermath was not a storm, but a quiet, spreading stain. The explosion had happened in the boardroom. Now, I watched the shockwave ripple outwards in slow motion, shattering the glass houses of our lives. Within hours, Helix River Systems convened a press conference. I watched it on the newsfeed in my office, the sound muted. Their CEO, a man with a face like sculpted granite, stood at a podium, flanked by lawyers. He looked exhausted. The chyron at the bottom of the screen told the story. Helix River CFO Tessa Calder suspended amidst fraud allegations. He spoke of a swift and thorough internal investigation and a commitment to corporate integrity. He never used Tessa's name more than once. She had already been rendered a non-person, an anomaly to be excised. The corporation, a living entity, was already working to save itself by amputating the diseased limb. The next tremor hit closer to home. An email, blasted to every resident of West Bray Oaks, arrived that afternoon. The subject line was stark. Official announcement from the HOA board. The message, written in panicked legalese, announced the immediate termination of the contract with Sentinel Pine Security. It promised a full refund of all integration fees and announced that the current board would be resigning pending an emergency election. The community's digital forum, once a placid stream of complaints about garbage collection and praise for prize-winning roses, was now a raging torrent of accusations and fear. The illusion of safety and trust that had been the neighborhood's primary selling point had evaporated in a single news cycle. Northwatch moved with the speed of a predator sensing mortal danger. By late afternoon, a press release was issued. We were entering into a memorandum of understanding with a leading national data privacy advocacy group. Together, we would co-author a new, industry-leading set of ethical guidelines for true anonymization. It was a brilliant move, a textbook example of crisis management. In one stroke, Northwatch had transformed itself from a potential co-conspirator into a repentant, trailblazing reformer. We were not just a victim of Helix River's fraud. We were now the champion of the very people whose data had been stolen. Marcus Thorne, the journalist, provided the next piece of the narrative. An update to his original story was published just before the market closed. His investigation had uncovered the registration for Thales and Daughters, LLC. The sole officer listed was not Tessa, but a distant cousin of hers, a retired schoolteacher living in another state. It was a classic strawman arrangement, designed to provide a layer of plausible deniability. The article included a photo of the Westfold Commercial Center, a yellow police tape now stretched across the bank of mailboxes, sealing box 24B in a tomb of evidence. With the corporate crime now in the hands of journalists and regulators, it was time to address the personal one. The following morning, I met my lawyer, Arthur Vance, at the district attorney's office. I did not go in as a victim seeking solace. I went in as a witness delivering a statement. The video file of Tessa's assault, neighborly01.move, had been transferred from my secure server directly to a forensically sound drive by a third-party specialist Arthur had hired. He handed it to the prosecutor in a sealed, signed evidence bag. The chain of custody was perfect. A clean, unbroken line from the moment of recording to this sterile government office. Arthur had also arranged for a counselor from a domestic violence victims advocacy group to be present, not for my emotional support, but to provide the prosecution with expert context on the patterns of abuse by powerful individuals. Every step was calculated, methodical, and stripped of emotion. It was the delivery of a data packet, a final, irrefutable entry in a log of wrongs. That evening, I found my father sitting on the front steps of the house, the porch light casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. The air was cool and still. He was holding a mug of coffee, but he wasn't drinking it. His hands were trembling slightly, causing the dark liquid to tremble with them. I sat down on the step below him. We sat in silence for a long time, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. "I didn't see it," he finally said, his voice a hoarse whisper. He was not looking at me, but at the house across the street, at the perfect, unblemished facade. All this time, I never saw it. The old me, the daughter who had craved his protection, would have offered comfort, but that person was gone. burned away in the cold fire of the last few months. "You didn't have to see, Dad," I said, my voice quiet but unyielding. "You just had to listen." He flinched, as if my words were a physical blow. He finally turned to look at me, and in his eyes, I saw the devastating dawn of a truth he could no longer ignore. He said nothing else. He just placed his coffee mug carefully on the concrete beside him, as if it were a fragile, priceless artifact. When I returned to my desk the next day, there was an email waiting for me. It was from Robert Avery, our CEO. The subject line was simply, "Thank you." The body of the message was brief. "Ria," it read, "your integrity and diligence under extreme circumstances have protected this company from what would have been a catastrophic legal and reputational failure. We are all in your debt." It was my corporate pardon, my letter of commendation, and the quiet closing of a chapter. That night, back in my room, I opened my encrypted laptop for the last time. I navigated to the secure folder that had consumed my life. Neighborly. It contained everything. The diagrams, the financial traces, the logs, the videos. My finger hovered over the delete key. This was my work, my case file, my rage, all neatly organized into subfolders. But it was not my burden to carry anymore. I had passed it on. I clicked the button. A dialog box asked if I was sure. I was. The folder, and everything in it, vanished, all except for one file, a single encrypted copy of the complete evidence package that I was required to maintain for the official investigation. My work was done. The sky over Westbury Oaks was a deep, empty blue. The flag still flew from every porch, limp in the windless evening air, but the silence was different now. It was no longer the serene, confident silence of a community at peace. It was the heavy, watchful silence of a place that had learned its walls were made of glass. A week later, a fragile peace had settled over Westbury Oaks. It was the quiet of a convalescent, a neighborhood holding its breath, unsure if it had healed. I was walking through the common green as dusk bled into night, the sky a deep, bruised purple, the yellow string lights that drooped between the oak trees, the same ones that had illuminated the cookout, hummed softly, casting a warm, gentle glow on the empty picnic tables. A faint, tinkling sound grew closer. It was the bell on a bicycle. A little girl from down the street, maybe 8 years old, pedaled past me, her face serious with concentration. Her mother, walking a few paces behind, offered me a small, hesitant smile. It was a real smile, not the perfectly calibrated performance that had been the standard currency here for so long. "Ria," the woman called out softly, "I just wanted to say, thank you." She paused, then seemed to search for the right words. "Those cameras, are they still?" I knew what she was asking, not if they were recording, but if they were safe, if the watchful eyes were there to protect or to exploit. "They're secure," I said, my voice quiet in the evening air. "They're enough to protect, not to invade." She nodded, a look of profound relief on her face. "Good," she said. "That's good." She and her daughter continued on their way, the sound of the little bell fading into the twilight. I stood there for a moment, listening to the crickets start their nightly chorus. My phone vibrated in my pocket, a silent, insistent buzz. I pulled it out. The screen glowed with the header of an email from the district attorney's office, a notification from the public records server I had subscribed to. The subject line was a final, definitive period at the end of a long and bloody sentence. "Indictment filed, State Voix, Tessa Calder, charges, wire fraud, grand larceny, domestic battery." I read the words once. They registered not with a surge of triumph, but with a quiet sense of finality. A process completed, a risk mitigated. I pressed the side button on my phone, the screen going dark. I slid it back into my pocket without opening the email. I didn't need to read the details. I had written them. I walked over to the community notice board, a glass-fronted case near the entrance to the green. Tacked to the cork inside was a new flyer. Printed on bright white paper, the headline was in a bold, clean font. "Town Hall Meeting, a vote on data transparency and a new community charter. Pinned beneath it, faded and curling at the edges, was the old flyer from the summer, the one with the clip art of smiling cartoon neighbors and the cheerful hollow words that had started it all. "Don't forget the annual HOA Cookout. Let's all be neighborly." My fingers found the thumbtack holding the old flyer. It came away easily. I folded the paper in half, then in half again, and slid it into my pocket. It felt like nothing. Then, I smoothed down the new flyer, pressing its corners flat against the cork. A new set of rules for a new reality. I turned and walked back toward my house. As I reached the front walk, the porch light flickered on. The front door opened, and my father stood silhouetted in the warm, golden light that spilled out onto the steps. He looked older. The unshakable certainty he had always worn like a suit of armor was gone, replaced by something softer, more fragile. He didn't speak. I didn't either. He just held the door open for me. We looked at each other, and in the silence, a new and difficult understanding passed between us. I stepped inside, into the warmth of the home that was now, finally, a sanctuary again. As the door closed, I walked into the kitchen. My gaze fell upon the hook by the stove. Hanging there was a clean, neatly folded kitchen towel. It was a cheerful, bright mint green. My fingers brushed against the soft fabric. The stain was gone. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from, so please drop a comment below and share your thoughts. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a thumbs up. And to help this story reach more people, please support it by hitting that hype button. It truly makes a difference.